Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. And it says, V'nivrechu v'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama, which means, and in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. And the Hebrew phrase, will be blessed, those Hebrew words, is the one Hebrew word, v'nivrechu. Can you say v'nivrechu? You know, I don't feel like you're really, let's do it again. V'nivrechu. All right, you're working with me. Excellent. So v'nivrechu, and in you, now who was this said to? It was said to Abraham, who back then was known as Abram. Somebody say first witness. This verse appears almost word for word a second time in Genesis chapter 18, verse 18. It says, v'nivrechu vo kol goyei haaretz, and in him all the nations, instead of families, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And again, it's v'nivrechu. Say v'nivrechu. Somebody say second witness. It appears with a slightly different wording. Instead of v'nivrechu, it's v'hitbarachu. I won't confuse you by making you say that, but it's another form of the same word. Genesis 22:18, again, third time now to Abraham. And in your descendants, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And again, it's the same root, which is three Hebrew letters. The letters bet, say bet, resh, chaf. Now, those three Hebrew letters come from the word berech. Remember I mentioned how Hebrew starts off with concrete concepts, which then become abstract? The concrete concept here, or term, is berech. This is a berech, a knee. Say knee. So if you want to translate it literally, in your descendants and all the nations of the earth will be need, or something to do with knees. It doesn't make a lot of sense if you translate it literally, but the concept of blessed comes from the knee. Now, originally when somebody would kneel down before God or a king and bless them, that's how we got the term for blessing, because they were on their knees. And when a father would bless his son, he would put his little son on his knee and bless him. And that's where we get how it's connected to knee. But that's not quite what's going on here. Because how is it that all the families of the earth are blessed through Abraham and his descendants? Let's look at a few more verses. Genesis 26:14, this blessing is passed on to Isaac. Somebody say not Ishmael. Is passed on to Isaac, and it says, "V'hitbarachu b'zaracha kol goyei haaretz," and in your descendants all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Somebody say fourth witness. Fifth witness, v'nivrechu, again v'nivrechu, b'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama u'v'zarecha, and in you and your descendants all the families of the earth will be blessed. 5 times we have this prophecy. Is this something important or some trivial thing? I think it's important if it's mentioned 5 times. Well, here's what it means. Well, let me before I get to that. Should I bring that? All right, I want to bring that. You know, this was something that a Messianic rabbi told me down in Florida, a rabbi named Ira Michelson. Hi, Ira. He told me this explanation, and I thought, oh, that's some stupid Christian thing. He's bringing his baggage from all those years and, you know, being influenced by that stuff. But then I thought, okay, I'm going to go and investigate and see if this is actually the case. And what I found, and I'll tell you in a minute what I'm talking about, what I found is that the rabbis talk about their understanding of what it means for all the families of the earth to be blessed. And here's what they said. It's in the Talmud. They quote this verse. They say, it says, Rabbi Eliezer said, what is meant by the verse, and all the families of the earth will be blessed, v'nivrechu, in you, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Abraham. Now, this isn't in the Bible. It doesn't literally say that, but it's a paraphrase of what they understand. I have 2 good branches to graft into you, Ruth the Moabite and Nehemia the Ammonite. Now, what's going on there? What's happening is the rabbis interpreted v'nivrechu, say v'nivrechu. They interpreted that as an agricultural term. And it turns out there's an agricultural term, lehavrich, from the same exact word meaning knee, and it means to graft. Now, why does it mean to graft? Because in agriculture, in ancient agriculture, there were 2 ways of grafting on a branch. You could lop off the old branches at the root, at the trunk, and then you tie or attach somehow the branch onto that root, and it will grow into it, and that's a way of grafting. Another way of grafting is the branch is growing out, and you only cut off part of it, and you take the new branch and you stick it onto that part. And then you usually do that at a right angle, and that forms a knee. And hence, to knee, lehavrich, is to graft. Now, when I saw this in the writings of the rabbis in the Talmud, I got to admit to you, I wasn't very impressed. Because, after all, the Talmud says all kinds of wacky things. It really does. What I did want to see, though, is what do the Hebrew linguists say? You know, the great experts of the Hebrew language. And many of them lived many years after the Talmud. One of the greatest ones is a rabbi named Rashbam. Rashbam was the grandson of Rashi. And he's actually considered to be one of the greatest Bible commentators who ever lived. And Rashbam, and let me just show you this, by the way. We have here, what they've done is they've taken v'nivrachu, say v'nivrachu. And the word brechot, say brechot. Brechot means branches in an agricultural term. And lehavrich, which means to graft, say lahavrich. And they say, wait a minute, all three of the same root, v'nivrachu, instead of, and they will be blessed, can mean, and they will be grafted. And this is what the Rashbam says. He says, will be blessed. This is a term of grafting. That is to say, the families of the earth will be mixed in with your family. And so, and in you and your descendants, all the families of the earth will be blessed, can be legitimately translated based on sound Hebrew linguistics as in you and your descendants, all the families of the earth will be grafted. Woo! I'm excited. Now, that's really interesting. So what's going on here? You know, I mean, I don't got to tell you guys that in the New Testament, Paul has this whole image of the grafting in. You know, Paul, though, tells us he was a Pharisee. And he was probably aware of this interpretation of the rabbis. That in Genesis, when it talks about all the nations of the earth being blessed, that the way they were going to be blessed was to be grafted into Israel. And isn't that amazing? Can I get an amen? Wow.